Okay, this is Frank Lawrence. I'm with Cris Mann today, and we're going to talk about one of the 10 key values of the Green Party, the nonviolence and civil disobedience is one of our key principles. You can flip the slide there, sir. And we want to define our terms a little bit. And so we want to say that nonviolence is the personal practice of not causing harm to oneself and others under every condition. It may come from the belief that hurting people, animals, and/or environment is unnecessary to achieve an outcome, and it may refer to a general philosophy of abstention from violence. Slide. So our Green Party principle platform plank here is it is essential that we develop effective alternatives to society's current patterns of violence. We will work to demilitarize and eliminate weapons of mass destruction without being naive about the intentions of other governments. We recognize the need for self-defense and the defense of others who are in danger. We promote nonviolent methods to oppose practices and policies with which we disagree, and we will guide our actions toward lasting personal, community, and global peace. Slide. One of the things I wanted to show you is one of the rare moments of nonviolent protests was in Tiananmen Square in China, June 5th of 1989, where a single individual stood and blocked a line of tanks. And it was one of those moments in human history that was captured. A man brave enough to do that. Slide. So part of our question is, what about all this protesting, and how can you question the state of your government and what it's doing? And part of it is based on the issue of legality is not a guide to morality. And I think most of us intrinsically know that, but I wanted to mention just a few of the really obvious, and they weren't always obvious, but important ideas. That at one time the Holocaust was legal in Nazi Germany, and hiding Jews was criminalized. And slavery was legal over here for hundreds of years, and freeing slaves was criminalized. Segregation following the freeing of the slaves was legal in most places in this country, but protesting racism was criminalized. And corporate ecocide, basically we're killing our planet, is perfectly illegal. And rebelling against things like pipelines and so forth is criminalized. They're attacked by police. And I'm sure that all of the rest of you could think of probably hundreds of things that are in our society where the laws of the country do not match the personal ethics and morality of the citizens. Next slide, please. So we wanted to talk a little bit about methods of nonviolent protest, and it just threw up this one example of a type, but there's really somewhere between 200 and 300 forms of nonviolent protest that you can do. And this is just basically a formal statement. Is one of the least active things that you can do. And we do these things all the time. We make public speeches, we fill out petitions, we send letters and emails and text messages to politicians all the time to try and get our influence made toward our government. Next slide, please. Civil disobedience is an old American tradition. And so one of the very first ones that you may have studied in school was Henry David Thoreau, who had written about it, and it was he wrote about it primarily because of slavery and the Mexican-American War, which he felt was very unjust. And as time goes on, we're not on the right side of history on either one of those things. But it basically makes the point that individuals, we have a duty not to permit our countries to be wrong, to be illegal, to do the wrong things. And we have a conscience and a duty to stand up to our government when it's unjust. And slide. So one of the questions this is a toughie, because intrinsically people feel that pitchforks and torches and guns would be a more effective protest than a nonviolent protest. But oddly enough, they've actually done scientific studies on it. Chenoweth and Steffen did an extensive study on the campaigns from 1900 to 2006 around the world, where there was an overthrow of government or territorial liberation. A major change in society was made eventually. 323 of these actions. And they analyzed it with 160 variables to see what was important and not important, what seemed to work and not work. And the results, completely turned the results on their heads. They weren't expecting it. But in the aggregate, nonviolent civil resistance was far more effective in producing change. Next slide. So the conclusion of the studies is countries in which there were nonviolent campaigns were about 10 times likelier to transition to democracies within a 5-year period compared to countries in where there were violent campaigns. Whether the actual campaign succeeded or failed, they eventually changed society. Next slide. So why does this work? Well, it's just counterintuitive. And so they got to looking at this, and part of the reason is that a peaceful protest pulls in a lot more people. I mean, people are not comfortable with showing up there where half the population is carrying around assault weapons and pistols and obvious weapons. It really turns off a lot of people. And so you gain far more allies with a nonviolent protest than you would ever with the violent one. And I made a couple points about generally that progressive change has a wave-like motion, and we're dealing this as politicians and progressives all the time anyway, where we make a little progress and then they push us back, and we make a little more progress, they push us back. But even in the tallest mountain, you can reduce it to grains of sand in a long enough period of time. And so progressive change is something that actually takes place over several generations. And you just have to keep your eye on the prize and know where your eventual goal will be. Next slide, please. So we think it all boils down to 4 different things. The first category of things is that you want a large and diverse participation that is sustained. You got to keep it up for a long time. And the second thing is that the movement needs to elicit a loyalty shifts among the security forces in particular, and also the other needs. And I notice our peace group does a good job of meeting with the authorities of the people that we're protesting against, and they kind of have work scripted out, and they work it out in advance so that we'll have a successful protest and they're not going to be unduly threatened. And security forces are important because they ultimately are the agents of repression, and their actions largely decide how violent the confrontation and the reaction to will be to your nonviolent campaign. And the riots always begin when the riot police show up. But there are security elites, economic and business elites, and state media that we need to pull into our program, and convince that we've got the right thing to do for everybody in general. And so we just chip away at the pillars of society that are propping up these legal but immoral things that we're protesting. Next slide. The third thing is that the campaign needs to be able to have more than just protests. And so we kind of have to constantly be changing our methods and approaches to things. There needs to be a lot of variations. And you keep the establishment off balance that way. They kind of never know what's going to hit them next. And the fourth thing is that when the campaigns are repressed, which they almost always are in some form or another, they don't either descend into chaos or we opt to use violence ourselves. We don't break our promise of being nonviolent. And the campaigns allow their repression to overthrow the government into total disarray. And we use that as a pretext to militarize their campaign. So the establishment knows how to respond to violent crowds, usually anyway. And they're all prepared to deal with you if you're a violent person, but not so prepared to deal with you if you're going to put a flower into the barrel of the gun or something. They don't know what to expect. So next slide. So the impact of small groups, another thing that came out in their study as time went on, was that they noticed that just a small proportion of the population is what determines the success of the program. If you usually they guess around 3.5%. If you get 3.5% support in society for what you're trying to do, you've won. It's just a matter of time to grind it out. And it sounds like a really small number, but in a country our size, we're talking about maybe 11.5 million people that come onto your side and your point of view. And that's a huge amount of influence in this society. So next slide, please. And so the role of preparation is important. You have to be ready to pair the cost of your programs and prepare for them, and to be able to withstand the amount of if it's a strike, you have to be willing to support yourselves during the strike. And so preparation and planning is extremely important to pull off a very successful program. And labor unions are well aware of this as well. Next slide. And win, lose, or draw. So if you make the surprisingly claim that that these things fail, basically it's a matter of time. And you just have to grind them out. It may take you 5 years to turn the country in a direction that you want to go. Next slide. Now I'm going to have another part here where we'll be joined by Cris Mann, and she's got some more to add to this. Thank you very much.
So picking up from what Frank said earlier, David Swanson, he's the founder of World Beyond War. He wrote a book entitled War is a Lie. And it's so going to war or being violent is that you have to lie to them. You have to lie to people to get them to do cruel things. This part is dedicated to Donald Rumsfeld, using his own words, half-truths and omissions and doublespeak. This is what he said to draw us into the deadly war with Iraq, with disastrous consequences for the earth and for humanity that we're still seeing today. Next slide, please. This is Donald Rumsfeld. Reports say that something hasn't happened and they're interesting to me, because as we know, there are known knowns. There are things we now know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know, but there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know. So this is one of his most famous quotes, and it means nothing. Next slide, please. We know where they are, Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. They're in the area around Tikrit, Baghdad, and east, west, south, north, and north somewhat. Doublespeak. Next slide, please. There are a lot of people who lie and get away with it. That's just a fact. Next slide. If you can't solve a problem, make it bigger. Donald Rumsfeld. Next slide. What has the Green Party done with regard to civil disobedience and nonviolence? Listen to this. This is Dr. Margaret Flowers and a doctor friend of hers who are trying to get a letter to President Biden about Medicare for all. See if you can see how this will turn out. We aren't going to watch the whole thing. How did they hold their ground, and how did they work together?
Yeah, you can take across the street. More than you can do that, but just not on hotel property. Right, but we want to be where the cameras.
But we don't want you to do it on our hotel property though if you're doing this. We do all the free speech you want across the street, but if you're not hotel
We're doctors and we're trying to get to the president.
you're not going to, but not here. You have to do it across the street. This is hotel property right now. You're on private property,
I know.
so you can't be on our hotel property.
Well,
If you guys come help me ask you to leave and go across the street, then I can do that. I don't want to.
I know I don't want to do that either, but I've been trying to reach the president now for
Right,
over a
that's
year.
not my problem. And
I know.
You're not going to see them here anyway, so
I know.
across the street, please.
I know that that we're
If you don't leave now, then ask the police to come ask you.
like with this.
This is hotel property. We have traffic that has to get through. You're blocking our traffic.
We're not actually looking at traffic.
If it's a private property, just live on the other side of the street and you guys can do one over there.
Well,
What do you do on that side? For any reason, you need to do on that side.
the message we keep getting is that they're in the way, and really, the president asked us. I know.
They have to fight. So if you're telling me you're trespassing, they don't have to arrest you for trespassing on private property.
I know, but
That's the way it goes.
we're not getting our voice heard. We're
That's
trying to
understand.
the president said he wants to hear
We're
from us.
They need to hear from
They
you over there.
always tell
Let's
us.
go across the street.
They've been telling
We're gonna
us
ask you
this
nice to
over
go
and
across the
over,
street.
is that we're in the way. But then the president goes on television and says he wants to hear what we have to say. Well, I don't understand.
Private property, not city property.
I know, but we really want the president to get the message. We've been trying to get to the president for a long time now. He said we're doctors. He said if you have a better approach, you should let me know.
Okay.
And we're trying to let him know.
Unfortunately, man, this belongs to the hospital.
Hotel.
They're private property.
Yeah, I know, but how are we going to get our message to the president?
Email or something like that.
No, it's just no, we've sent letters. We've had rallies outside of the White House. They don't listen. I don't know how to get the president to listen. I know. I know. Right. No, we will get the
So in that film, the two women doctors held their ground, and going on what Frank said, they used logic with the police and the hotel people. And it was clear that the hotel staff in front of all their guests and things and did not want to tackle these two women and throw them on the ground. So they took advantage of that, and also, and in the end, they did get arrested, but they stayed their position. They held the sign for quite a long time of Medicare for all, and just sort of worked with the people that they were working with. So also Howie Hawkins has been arrested for civil disobedience, and candidate Jill Stein, when she was running for president and other times also, has been arrested. Next slide. And this is the Memorial Day protest that was held here in Kansas City on Memorial Day. And Frank and I participated in that. Is that a video? I thought that was a video. Yeah. So in this action here, the Green Party co-sponsored this with Peaceworks. And you can see in the background, there was a die-in. And shortly after that, 5 people, it was prearranged, got arrested by crossing the property line. Next slide. There's a lot of rich lessons for civil disobedience and nonviolent actions from Standing Rock. One of them is that the Native Americans built a small city, which was a strategy for civil disobedience. They had people divided into different tents with specific jobs, and that everybody helped in the process. And as you can see, it was quite brutal. A young woman's arm was nearly blown off with a grenade. Many arrests have taken place. People have put themselves in danger, but it's all very organized, and it's one of the lessons we can draw of how to do it. Basically, how to stand your ground. Next slide. And thank you for listening. Nonviolence plays a huge role in changing our society for the better, and hoping that you will go in coalition with groups and help in this strategy, because it's very effective. Thanks so much.